Welcome to the City Debate Show. Joining me around the table from the Manchester Evening News, Christopher Bailey and Andrew Hinchcliffe, footballer turned broadcaster, and not an estimable in there. Right, hey Bailey,
it's not called as engine bracket, yeah?
No, look, am I looking a bit shaken? I was coming in on the tram.
A bit shaken,
coming in on the tram, this bloke says, "Do pensioners need tickets?" What's he asking me for? It's watching City. Now, listen, we've not had a chance to post a City response to the Forest Dave Backler.
A good word.
But you were almost there at Portsmouth, weren't you, at the weekend?
Oh, yeah, we had plenty of time to think about the Forest game. Yeah, it was what it was. It was absolutely an appalling performance. Completely deserved victory from Forest. They looked hungrier, they looked like they wanted it more, they looked like they knew what the FA Cup was all about. 6,000 of their fans created a great atmosphere, and once Sean Wright-Phillips went off, that was the end of City's hopes, really, and it maybe just crystallised what needs to be done in this transfer window, because it just simply wasn't good enough.
Well, we'll talk about what needs to be done in a moment, but I'll tell you what, Andy, in the hour after that game, on radio, I got 300 responses by text and email. I know, because I see on the Evening News website, you see how many comments Chris's articles get. It was up to 400 in about an hour and a half. So there can't be that many more performances of that egregious ineptitude in anybody's locker at City, can there?
I think Mark Hughes left the dressing room and went straight upstairs and had a chat with people. I think what it did, I think Chris is right, it kind of focuses everyone's mind. In 190 minutes of football, Mark Hughes has gone upstairs and said to the hierarchy there, look, it's obvious from that game alone that the team simply aren't good enough. The owners have stuck by Mark Hughes. They're allowing him to spend some money now as well. I think he'll be in charge right through to the summer. The owners have stuck by him. They believe in Mark Hughes. Mark Hughes has said, and I think he's got every right to say it, is the team is not good enough. You take Robinho out, Ireland out, Sean Wright-Phillips comes off. We haven't got strength in depth. The team, if we lose to a struggling side like Forest, it shows that the players simply aren't good enough, and that's why Mark Hughes now is scrabbling to get players in.
Well, they're either not good enough or they're not in good enough form, which means you still need to take them out of the firing line, but there's no one to bring in the place. There is a complete lack of depth there.
I think I look at Caicedo and Joe, Fernandes, Michael Ball, always saying that they're good enough to be in a City side. If you sign the likes of Santa Cruz, Bellamy, Parker, Wayne Bridge, they're going to go straight into any City team. So that shows you there's 4 players there that I don't think are good enough to be playing for the team.
Right, we're halfway through the transfer window. We've had one signing, so let's take that as our starting point. And since you are a former England left-back, Wayne Bridge.
Yeah.
Right. No, we'll ask you first.
Left.
How much did we pay for him?
Slightly more than £10 million.
So, 10 million quid, Andrew Hinchcliffe. When you were a lad, let's face it, a year ago, for 10 million quid, you'd want Paul Breitner.
I think it would have bought me 3 times over.
Easy.
I only went for 3 million my whole career, but I think, he's not really had a chance. I think he needed to leave Chelsea. He needed to get out from Ashley Cole's shadow to show what a good player he is. I think he is a very good player. I think he's exactly the type of player that Mark Hughes is looking for. A stepping stone player to the great players that might be coming in 2 or 3 years' time. But Wayne Bridge, with that kind of money, I think it's a bit elevated, but I still think it's a good buy. We're desperate for a left-back. We're really struggling with Garrido and Ball weren't good enough, so I think he's going to go straight into the side and stay there. He's 28. He's got a point to prove. I think he's the kind of player that Mark Hughes will continue to try and sign. Experienced. They know the game inside out, and I think he'll look to sign players like Scott Parker and Bellamy, players that have been around the block, and I think Bridge is just the start of that.
Right. Christopher Bailey. Wayne Bridge, which list is he on? Because you wrote an article today, and there's a list that Mark Hughes won, and the list he's got to sign for the owners.
Well, no, I think that's overstating it.
Oversimplification?
Yeah, I mean, the owners want what the fans want. I mean, ultimately, they want the best players in the world at City, but they accept that they've got to be more, the buzzword at City would be pragmatic, until they can sprinkle that stardust on the team. But, while they're going for the Scott Parkers and the Bellamys and Santa Cruz and people like that, they're keeping one eye on the situation with players like Kaka, because if he suddenly becomes available, the owners, City's owners, are cash rich enough to just go and buy him. So that's where they're at. I mean, they are concentrating on Mark Hughes' list. There's no ambiguity about that. Mark Hughes is 5 or 6 players that he put on his list way before Christmas. That's the list they're concentrating on. But there is, if the chance comes to sign a superstar, they're not going to let it pass them by. But, I mean, this transfer window's not proving... It's not a walk in the park for Hughes at the moment, is it? They're not...
Right, well, a few months ago, Mark Hughes said, yes, we are a very rich club, but we are not going to be held to ransom To a layman, it doesn't half look like it at the moment, Andrew.
Well, it'd be interesting to see. I thought a lot of deals would get done in the first couple of weeks of January, but the more you think about it, the more teams like Blackburn are maybe holding out for really good money for Santa Cruz. Will they still be in that position come the last week of January? City, yes, they're desperate for players, we've got money, but are West Ham going to hold out for 20 million for Parker and for Bellamy when 15 million, I think, is on the table? They're not going to let that money just slip away. Same with Blackburn. It'd be interesting to see whether City have said we're not going to get to pay over the odds for the players that we want, whether they're strong enough to walk away from deals if they think they aren't right and look at another player. It'll be interesting to see how they do with that. But I'm sure this list of players, there must be a hell of a lot of players on there. So if Santa Cruz doesn't work out, surely they have other people in mind and deals that can be done before the end of January.
Again, it's not simple, is it? It's there's two strains of thought here. Mark Hughes and his coaching staff know they need new players, so they'll be keen to get them in as quickly as possible.
Of course.
The new owner and Gary Cook, the executive chairman, who is the man negotiating the deals along with Paul Aldridge, they're keen not to be seen to be able to be ripped off, if you like. So then the two don't necessarily meet. So you might have a situation where the manager's saying to the executive chairman, hang on a minute, we're supposed to be the richest club in the world. They only want another 2 million. Give it them. I want that player in by Saturday. And yet there are budgets there are budgets in place, and Gary Cook would then have to go to the owners and say, well, why did you pay over what we'd agreed for?
That's where the 2
budget.
million becomes 5 million,
So
7 million. That's the problem.
So that's
isn't it?
where that's where the fans and the manager want the players in, and it's simple as far as they're concerned. We're the richest club in the world. Go and pay for them. And whereas the owners have got the budgets and they don't want to set a precedent in this window where they get ripped off, taken for mugs, and then for every transfer window from now on, they're going to end up paying.
Have the owners actually put a figure in mind for January, would you say? Is it 50, 60
I
million?
mean,
You think there's a hard and fast
I don't know
figure?
what it is. I think it's more than 30 or 40 million and less than 100 million.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's a budget figure in there, and they don't really want to spend more.
Right, so you've explained the scenario very eloquently, Christopher. Which way he's going to jump?
Which way who's going to jump?
Who's going to blink first, us or them?
I think he'll get his players. I'll be surprised if there's not one or more coming this week. I think he's got to, because if he doesn't, then we're facing a relegation battle, and that would cost a lot more money than a couple of extra million for 3 or 4 players now. So I think he will get his players. It might not be till the last week, because you look at every January transfer window and all the businesses, the bulk of it's always done in the last week of it for some bizarre reason.
There's an interesting knock-on effect for football generally, though, here, Andy, because there's a price at the moment which is a Manchester City price.
It's a premium, isn't it?
But
yeah.
There's also there's a January tax, and then there's a City tax.
Yeah, of course there is, yeah. But once you've established the City price, it doesn't revert to normal finance for the rest of the world. That becomes the price, doesn't it? So the implications for other clubs, if we do pay over the odds...
I'm not sure whether that's the case. I don't think any club in the world has the spending power that we have. So whether we're just a complete one-off, I'd be surprised suddenly if then the transfer fees for so-called average players then leaps up by £2 or £3 million because City have paid £2 or £3 million more. It's all about circumstances. City are desperate for players, maybe West Ham, Blackburn desperate for the cash as well. So maybe it's just the way. But that's why January, I think, is such a daft idea.
It's a seller's market.
And it always is. I mean, I've done a piece for tomorrow's paper. You look at the people we've got in January: Samaras, Caicedo, Castillo, Benjani, Matt Mills.
So it's not been so bad then.
You know what I mean?
Look back on the tram.
When people say to me, and they write in and on the website and the emailing, and they say Scott Parker, Bellamy, Santa Cruz, Given, they're not good enough for City. And you go, well, hang on a minute, look who we've bought in previous January windows, and would all those people get in our team now? Mm-hmm. And imagine those 5 with Wright Phillips, with Ireland, with Robinho. And then tell me that's not a good Premier League team.
The only
and
criteria now at the moment is, are they better than what we have? It's not going to be the end. Scott Parker's not going to be in the side if we do sign him, or Craig Bellamy in 2 or 3 years' time. That's not what Mark Hughes is looking to do here. He's looking to move us forward.
Immediate improvement.
And they are undoubtedly better than what we have.
And what he's looking... The key word here, Jim, is reliability, because there's no doubt that this squad we've got has got talent. There's talent all over the place. Alano's a talented footballer. Dunnan Richards are talented. I've got talent. Joe Hart will be a really good goalkeeper. Stevie Ireland and Wright Phillips, they've all got talent, but they're not reliable at the moment. It's no good doing it 5-1 against Hull and losing away to West Brom and losing at home to Nottingham Forest. That's what Hughes is looking for. He's looking for experience and reliability. They're the two key words. And if you look at all the people he's really seriously targeting, they've all got 300 or 400 league games and in 50 or 60 international caps, and that's what he wants. He wants to know he can get a performance out of every player.
I don't think he's willing to say, forget about looking at United and Chelsea and Arsenal, look at Aston Villa. If you look at their side, they're a very strong team. If you look individually, they don't look fantastic on paper. You wouldn't say, well, they've got 5 or 6 world-class players there, but they're a strong team. Martin O'Neill's done that. He's built that side. I think that's what Mark Hughes is looking to do, certainly over the next 12 months.
You could have set a precedent on the City debate show here, Mr Bailey, because if you read that January signing list again, we could be one short of the table. Will I go off for a quiet week?
Well, that point Andy makes about Aston Villa,
yeah.
I mean, that's perfect. Look who Martin O'Neill's bought.
But Villa are the exemplar for us, how they should be.
Curtis Davis, Zach Knight, Steve Sidwell, John Carew, and all those players. If you said to City fans, Mark Hughes is wanting to sign these, they'd go, oh, sack him. Mm-hmm. And in Martin O'Neill's first season in 2006, they went 20 games with 1 win from November to April. And no one was clamouring for him to be sacked, which is why, Hughes, you need to get off his back. Let him do his business in the transfer window and improve us. And if he don't improve us before the end of the season, he knows what will happen, we know what will happen, the owners knows what's going to happen. But, you've got to give the man a little bit of a chance. And Aston Villa is that template, because look at them now. No superstars particularly, but a really good unit.
This is Andy Hinchcliffe, formerly of Manchester City and England, now a broadcaster of some esteem. Christopher Bailey, the City reporter at the Manchester Evening News. I will be going off for a quiet week. After that, we'll be back to talk about City transfer targets. This is the City Debate Show. We'll see you in 2. City Debate Show. Round the table with me today, Andy Hinchcliffe, formerly of City and England, now a broadcaster, of course, and Chris Bailey, the City reporter at the Manchester Evening News. Let's stick with this Villa thing, Chris, because the names that you reeled off before, nobody would get too excited about.
Got Rio Coker, I think, on that one.
Well, that's a classic name. The icing on the cake. But to be serious, nobody would get that excited about them individually, but collectively they are the buzz team in the Premier League.
And that's what our manager is trying to do. You've got the fantastic flair of Robinho, who is world class. I mean, he's second top scorer in the Premier League. Wright Phillips, who is a fantastic international footballer, and Stevie Ireland. So you've got those three. And you put 5 real, reliable, hard-working players around them with Vincent Kompany, and then you've got a real, what I would call a proper team. Now, no one's saying, you're right, no one's saying that's the finished article, this is the team that's going to get in the Champions League. Of course it's not, but it takes us another step nearer. And as we progress, the Parkers and the Santa Cruzes and the Bellamys become the squad players, and, as better players come in. And the whole point of transfer windows is to keep improving the team. And, he really hasn't had a chance yet to put his mark on this team. And, if you pardon the pun, and hopefully he will be allowed to.
Now, Andy, let's just talk about a couple of those names, because Scott Parker, a few years ago, I thought had a real promise. Mm-hmm. Craig Bellamy, we know he's a bit balmy, but when he's on blob, he's a heck of a footballer. Rocky Santa Cruz did great in his first season at Blackburn. But we talked about people who are going to be reliable and put a shift. All 3 of those have spent an awful lot of time on the treatment table over the past 12 months.
Haven't we all, sadly?
They could be sponsored by Dettol,
exactly,
couldn't they?
This is... I'm sure Mark Hughes will look at that situation as well. But if there's 3 players, would you spend £40 million on those 3 players? Now, maybe Mark Hughes feels we have to because we need 3 better players in the team. I don't think City fans would argue with any of those players coming in because they will walk straight into the side. But I think managers nowadays, they really do their homework. I remember when I signed for Ron Atkinson, he knew absolutely everything about the career I'd had from start to finish. I think managers look at players they're signing, they look at where they've been, the injury problems they've had. This is maybe part of the reason they're not looking at Michael Owen, because of the injury problems he's maybe had. Maybe that's something that will put them off as well as his wages. But I think, all in all, I think if Scott Parker's fully fit, if Bellamy's fully fit, Rocky Santa Cruz is as well, I think Mark Hughes will be very keen to get all 3 of them. It's just how much money he's willing to spend on them.
You know, Vincent Kompany and Martin Petrov both came with poor injury records. You know, that doesn't always mean an awful lot. They know Bellamy inside out. Hughes and his coaching staff. They got the best out of him at Blackburn. I mean, I remember Bobby Robson being quoted, Sir Bobby Robson being quoted somewhere saying any team that he's managed ever in his career, he would put Craig Bellamy in it. Now, you know, if you stood in a pub talking to your mates, you might think he's tattooed and he hits people with golf clubs and, you know, this and that. But as long as he's performing on the pitch, he knows where the goal is and he'll create havoc and he works exceptionally hard. And, you know, when we get a little bit further down the line, he won't be a number 1 striker. But, you know, you've got to trust the manager's judgment on people like Craig Bellamy. I mean, Scott Parker's played nearly 250, 260 games, so it's not like he misses every season. They will, as Andy says, all those players would improve our team, and that's what we need.
I think Bellamy as well has got a bit of nastiness in his. I'm not saying go around kicking people, but maybe City need a bit of that in their side as well. Maybe we're a bit too nice at times.
You know, it's almost like City are a team that's taken a vow of silence. You expect them to come out in monk's habits sometimes. No one speaks.
No, the thing about Bellamy is when he plays for somebody else, he drives you balmy. When he plays for you, you think, what a handful
Robbie
he is.
Savage was a similar player at Blackburn, wasn't he? You know, oh, God, I hate him. But, you know, you'd want him on your team.
Like Paul Dickoff as well. When he was at City. City fans absolutely love Paul Dickoff. When I played against him, he was horrendous because he never give you a minute's peace. But that's the type of player, I think, City, and that's what Mark Hughes may be looking at that aspect of Bellamy's character as well.
They need, you know, that dressing room, it needs more voices. On the field, we need more leadership.
Well, you certainly get that with Craig Bellamy, I would have thought. Now, let me ask you this, though, Chris, because there was one interesting name linked to City this weekend.
Go on.
We've talked about why they would go for the Scott Parkers and the Craig Bellamys. You said you've always got to keep an eye out. If there is a superstar floating about, you may want to try and sling your net over it. You were linked with Arshavin this weekend, weren't you? Do you give it any credence?
No, I think that's Zenit trying to create an auction where there isn't going to be one. I mean, I don't know for sure. He's not somebody who's ever been mentioned to me in terms of City being interested. But for me, he's too much like an Alano or Robinho, an Ireland, right? You know, he's that kind of. He would be what I would call a Sven-type player. You know, he'll play brilliantly, like Modric or someone like that. You know, he'd play brilliantly for a couple of games, then you wouldn't see him away from home for 3 or 4 weeks, and then he'd have another. And his form, by all accounts, has not been great this season. But then again, you think, well, if Arsenal want him, he can't be that bad.
Well, he's got a bit better player.
Because Wenger's a decent...
But they also want Stephen Ireland, don't they?
Well, there you go.
I think Mark Hughes is looking at players like Parker and Bellamy who will be reliable, will be available week in, week out, home and away. Now, Arshavin, is he somebody, like you said, would you play him away from home? Or he's not the type of player...
I'm not sure that kind of player...
Not in the short term.
Maybe in the summer.
Right, well, let's talk about people who've been linked with going the other way, because you'd have been absolutely astounded 12 months ago with 2 of the names currently in the frame. Richard Dunn has been linked with a possible move out of Manchester City. How would you feel about that?
Well, he nearly went in the summer, didn't he? And, you know, and they'd worked very hard to make sure he stayed, got a new contract. I mean, by his standards, he's having a poor season. I mean, that has to be said. I mean, I like Richard as a player, I like him as a person, and but he's had a poor season by his own standards. Now, I'm not sure whether that's because Mike is also having a poor season next to him, or there's not enough protection in front of him, and the full-backs haven't been stopping the cross. I mean, there can be a whole team defence thing there that shows the central defenders in a poorer light than they should. But I'd like to keep him certainly till the end of this season, because there's not much sign of someone better coming in. And if 3 or 4 clubs want him, that's a sign.
Are we judging Richard Dunn on the last 6 months or the last 4 years?
Yeah, he's been our player of the year
He's
for
been
4 years.
Absolutely, and I'm a big fan. I was with Richard Dunn at Everton. He was a youngster there when I was at Everton, and I think he's just a fabulous player. I think it'd be folly. I think Mark Hughes, if he said to him, look, we're going to get rid of Richard Dunn, even regardless of how he's playing, I think he'd be loath to do that.
Well, I would as well, but we talk about the changing nature of Manchester City. For the past 4 years, you go, Richard Dunn is great, and what's the alternative? if you were being slightly cynical. Now you go, Richard Dunn's had half a dozen bad games. Who's the best centre-half in the world, don't you?
Yeah, but you can't get... That's the problem.
Know,
you can't
just
pluck them off, especially in January, Yaya Toure and Kaka and people like this might be willing to move in the summer, but they're not going to move while they're fighting for league titles and Champions League places. And I look at Richard Dunn this way. Richard Dunn, we will be a really good team when Richard Dunn's not our best player, or not in the running for Player of the Year. That's how I would summarise that.
Well, that's a fair summary. The other one that, in some ways, disappoints me, not so much personally, but for the lad himself. A year ago, we were talking about Michael Johnson, and I sat around this table and said, oh, don't saddle him with the new Colin Bell tag, because let him be the first Michael Johnson. Now, every story you read said he could be part of a deal going the other way. That saddens me, Andy.
He's not been fit enough, has he?
No, but
I don't know what the extent of this is. Is it a hip problem, or he's got a major problem there? And he just simply hasn't played football. How can you sell someone who isn't fully fit? It just doesn't happen anyway. And again, like Richard Dunn, you're loath to sell players that you know are good players. As Chris has said, some players are in the team not playing well. Johnson's not even been in the team to show how good he is. So let's get him fully fit. Let's see whether his heart's still in it. He wants to play for the team. I'm sure he would do with the players that might be coming to this club. He's still a very good player, but if he's not fit and can't get in the side, you can't make a decision. Exactly, you can't make a decision on letting him go.
But the thing is, let's just hope that all his problems that he's having at the moment, whether they be physical or mental or whatever they are all down to what Steven Gerrard had at Liverpool, and that's a year's growing pains. I mean, I'm told he's grown 1.5 inches in the last year, Johnson, and the aches and the pains may be just because he's still maturing into his frame. And let's hope that, a rest next season will be his big season. As for selling him, I don't know who'd buy him when you're not played all season anyway, to be honest.
But there's also a few stories doing the rounds, and it may just be kite flying, that it's more between his ears than actual physical injuries.
Only the manager and the club doctor and the physio and Michael and his family know whether that's the case or not. I mean, when things are going badly in a football club, we get calls every hour. I've seen a player in this bar, I've seen a player doing this, and it happens when everything comes down to results, don't it?
And they're all young players as well. You look at the way Michael Richards has played. Joe Hart maybe has made a few mistakes that he hasn't been making. As Chris said, when things start to slide, the young players seem to get more grief than anybody else because they seem to suffer more than anybody else. The experienced players can maybe battle their way through it, but I think it's maybe a bit premature to jump on that and say, right, we've got to get rid of Hart and Richards and Johnson.
I'd love to see that talent flower, because what you'd love with Michael Johnson, based on what we've seen so far, you'd love to see him grasp the challenge of Manchester City in the way that Stephen Ireland has.
He is exactly what we've been missing, someone to play alongside Vincent Kompany in that two-man holding position who can box to box. And, we haven't got anybody. I mean, Alano plays there but doesn't do the box-to-box. He sits deep, and Didi Hamann can't do it anymore. And Gelson Fernandez is limited in that respect. So, we have missed Michael Johnson as we've missed Martin Petrov. And that's another thing that maybe people don't take into account when they're quick to say, well, Sven got the best out. But two of Sven's best players were Michael Johnson and Martin Petrov, and Hughes hasn't been able to utilise either of them.
But I'd love to see Johnson get back to somewhere near his best.
Because he could be anything. He could be a really great player.
But a player Chris touched upon there, Andy, Alano, it's looking increasingly like he's toast now, isn't it, in City?
Yeah, it's amazing. I think, again, in a short space of time, he's gone from probably our best player to a player that you're starting to question his application more than anything else. I'm not questioning his ability. I just think there's obviously a problem there between Mark Hughes and Alano, and I just think the games I've seen him play, he just doesn't look like he's too interested. He's playing more for himself than for the team, and City can't afford one player to be doing that, let alone more than that. So I think I'd be surprised if he's still at the team, at the club at the end of January. Certainly in the summer, I think Mark Hughes will be looking at other players to replace him.
Back to that reliability, aren't we, again? Against Hull City, he looked fantastic. Against Nottingham
Forest. You talk about the dressing room as well. We're not sure what's going on. Lots of stories about what's happening in the dressing room.
He wouldn't have got into Nottingham Forest team the way he played in that cup tie. And yet against Hull, he was world class. So and he did that very much the season under Sven. He hardly finished a game, but the first half of the season he was kind of winning his games on his own. Great free kicks and wonderful passing, and then the second half of the season he kind of faded out.
I think you look at it now, if we've got Kompany, we've got Ireland, and you sign, say, Scott Parker, you put Alano into that mix, is he going to be one of the first two names in central midfield? I don't think he will be.
I think you're looking at Alano being a backup to your three musketeers, Wright Phillips, Ireland, Robinho, across behind the striker. Then Alano really is, if one of them's not missing, put him in there at the moment.
Many thanks to Chris Bailey, many thanks as ever to Andy Hinchcliffe. See you next time, City Debate Show.